you can just, really, you can just use Elmer's for most of the repairs that you'll need to do, especially in a public library or in a home library. So, and then in your kits, additionally, you've got a glue brush. And so this is just a natural hair brush. That's preferred to synthetic because it holds the glue better, which means that you have to do less going back to your glue bowl to refill. And when you're gluing, you want to kind of be as efficient as possible so the glue doesn't dry before you finish your repair. And then we also have wax paper, and that we're going to use in conjunction with the glue to help protect the book, the parts of the book we don't want to get glued from the parts that we do want to glue. So we're going to move forward in our little pamphlet. And so the first thing that's really helpful when you're talking about book repair is to know what the different parts of the book are called. Because if you just know, well, something is broken, that makes it a lot harder to narrow down the best way to fix it. So I've drawn some pictures here. So I'm just going to grab a book. And so you can see, so here we've got just a standard hardcover book. So we all know this is the spine of the book. That's where the title usually is. On a library, that's where the call number usually goes. We have the front cover. There's the back cover. And then inside, where all the words are, this is called the text block. And this is the part of the book that most often separates from the cover of the book and where a lot of our problems come in. And so then in addition to that in the book, we've got the top of the spine is called the head of the book. The bottom is called the tail. This part of the text block, the edge is called the foredge. So sometimes you'll see that the pages are uneven. And so it's like a deckled edge, right? Where like they try to kind of make it look fancy. And then this is often also where you will see if a book has been repaired poorly, there will be a page that's sticking out a little bit further, and then it gets really worn because it isn't protected by the rest of the text block. And so then when you open the book, you've got the end paper. So with kids' books, a lot of times it's like fancy and illustrated potentially. Sometimes in like science fiction, this is where the maps are that tell you about the world, or the fantasy, I should say. And so there's the part that's glued down to the book. And then there's this part that's called the flyleaf. And you can see it here in this book. Do you see how when I open the flyleaf, this other page comes with it? So that's because this is how the text block is attached to the cover, is with this page. And so often we will see issues like this where it's come apart. And this has some additional support with this webbing right here that also attaches from the spine to the cover. And you can kind of see, do you see the webbing underneath the end papers right here? Can you kind of see where that is? And so that gives it some extra strength, but when it separates from so the flyleaf has pulled this page off of the text block, and now we've got a weakness here. So we're gonna learn how to fix that today. In addition to those parts of the book, there are different book structures. So you can see this one right here. So this is a sewn binding. And of all of my books on here that we're gonna fix today, there's only one that's actually a sewn binding. And let me see if we can get it nice and close. I don't know if you can really see, I'm trying to get it to focus. But there are signatures, which is different parts of the book that are folded together and then sewn together. And so this one has signatures, if you can see. I might pass it around for the folks that are here. And if you open it up to the middle of one of the signatures, you can see the stitching that is holding the books together in addition to the glue and the other pieces. But more often, these days, you will see glued bindings. We used to just see these like in paperback books. I've got one right here. So we used to just see them in paperback books, right? It's really clear. It's just a stack of paper that's been glued together and then a cover's been glued on top. But we're seeing glued bindings more and more in hardcover books. Like I said, I've got my cart here with all of these hardcover books to be fixed, and only one of them is a sewed binding. The rest are all glued bindings. A glued binding is also called a perfect binding, which is kind of funny because they fall apart much faster than sewn bindings. But especially like kids' graphic novels, you will see the glued bindings there, and that's one of the weaknesses of that structure, and that's why those pages always fall out almost immediately. So any questions about the parts of the book or, oh, and let me add, so I realized in my drawing, I missed an important part of the book. So if you see the end paper where it attaches to the fly leaf, that is called the hinge of the book. And the hinge is just like what you think of on a door. It's the part that enables it to open. And because it's a moving part of the book, it is the part that wears out the fastest. And so that's why so many of our books separate like this, is because it has a weak hinge. So we're going to be talking a lot about hinges. Okay, so any questions about the structure of the book or anything that you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that before? Okay. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at today is cover separation. And so in the picture that I've drawn here, this is a very clear cover separation. In fact, it looks just like this book that I've got here, where the cover has totally detached from the text block and even the spine. And, you know, you would probably look at this book and say, well, we just have to get a new one. Like it's totally come apart. You can see that it's even starting to pull off the back. You know, how would we put this back together? That doesn't seem like it's worth our time or energy to try to figure it out. But it's actually a very simple mend. And so if we look at our steps in our pamphlet, we're going to take our wax paper. I always fold my wax paper in half to give it a nice crisp edge, because we want it to be as straight as possible. And you're going to set your wax paper. So on this one, we can see where the glue even is that wasn't strong enough, that dried out probably. And so for something like this, you would probably want to peel the old glue off if you can. If you can do it delicately without ripping the paper too much, that's ideal because it'll give you a better adhesion. But it also gives you a good guideline for this book of where you want your glue to go to reattach the cover. So, and a general rule of thumb is about 1/8 of an inch, just because if you glue it too much, then it's going to pull the page it's glued to too much, and then it's going to cause weakness in the next page. Also, sometimes you'll have patrons or readers who think they're being helpful and they think, oh, this isn't supposed to be attached because it's attached too much, and they'll detach it for you so helpfully, and then you'll have to do the mend again. So just a little bit is all you need. And for a book like this, where the spine is also detached, we would take our glue brush. I think mine is still drying. Can I snag one? So we would take our glue brush, and I've got a little like paint holder. You don't need anything this fancy for your glue. At home, I just use like the lid of a cream cheese container and you just squirt the glue in there. You don't want to do a ton at a time because, again, you don't want it to dry out before you use it. And so this is actually kind of a good rule of thumb if you can kind of get an idea of how deep this is. It would just be like one of these you would put glue into. And I've got these for us tonight that I'll pass out when we're ready for you to try. And so you would take your brush and you would really mash it in the glue, and you want it to kind of really get into the bristles of the brush, because that'll prolong the glue that you can use before you have to go back to refill it up. In bookbinding, it's called charging your brush, where you just get it nice and full of glue. And then you'll take your glue brush, and I'm just going to pantomime it because I'm going to hand this book to someone here to mend today. And you start on the wax paper, and then you glue out towards the spine. So for this one, you would also glue up the spine because we want to reattach the spine. And then you would glue, you always go from the wax paper towards the spine, because if you go back and forth, then you can get some glue underneath your wax paper, and then your line isn't nice and straight and it causes stress on the paper. And so you just work your way up or down, whichever way you prefer. And once you've got it all nice and glued up, you would peel your wax paper and put it someplace where you're not going to accidentally set something else on it. And then you just use your hand and you would push the spine, in this case, back up onto it. And you would kind of pull the cover a little bit because you want the foredge to line back up, because you still want the cover to protect the book. And so you would pull it just a little bit and then kind of use your hand to make sure that it attaches. And then, since this mend is in the front, you would turn it over so that the weight of the book helps hold it in place, and you would just let it dry overnight. And it's really that simple. And so, so that is what you would do with a complete separation on a paperback like this. And it is also the same thing that you would do for a mend like this. So this one, there is no spine that needs to be reattached, but you do want to reattach these pages together. So again, you would kind of eyeball about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 of an inch, and you would charge up your glue brush. This one, you would have to be a little bit more intentional about it because the cover is still so close. So you would just want to make sure that you're only gluing up the text block that you want, that you're not going too far over and then getting glue on the page where you don't want it. If that happens, which it does happen sometimes, you think you're being so careful and something splatters or somebody bumps you or something. If that happens, once you finish gluing up where you want it, you would peel the wax paper off and then grab a new piece of wax paper, or it doesn't have to be new, but just a not wet piece of wax paper, and you would put it in between. And so then when you close up your book, you would line it up as much as you can, again, working to line up the foredge and kind of make it as square, as lined up as you can, and close it and turn it over. And then if you have gotten any glue where you don't want it, this wax paper will keep the pages from adhering where you don't want them to. You'll still have the glue stain on the page, but it's not going to affect the structure of the book. Any questions about that? Okay, I'm going to pass out books here from our library for you to practice on. Or if you brought your own that has this kind of damage, you can try it on yours. And folks at home, if you have books at home, go grab one and give it a try. And if not, we'll reconvene in just a few minutes. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And I think I've got enough of it. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. Cassie, is this too, I should just need a bigger.
This one's more helpful. Yeah. Has more structural issues. It really needs help. Ooh, Marty has her. Ooh, and I've also got this paperback one if anyone wants to try the.
Oh, no, I mean,
okay. So this one has that same issue, but it's in the middle. Yeah. And so one thing that we're going to do, you see how it's still attached here?
You got it. Okay.
Yeah, because that'll allow you to get the glue everywhere you need it and get it lined back up again.
Okay.
And so for this one, you can see it's got a spine liner here that the glue has just spread out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in this case, we're going to take the paperback book. We're going to try to get the glue inside of there, and then also do the little.
Okay.
And I got a different one if you want to try this little one, but
if you're library.
I think you're capable.
So I have a question. Similar where it has like, so what I want to do then, do we have to do I leave that and then do the glue? Okay.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yep, you got it, but you want to leave a little bit of space because you want to reattach it here. Yeah, and this is the hinge inside. So if it's still firmly attached, we want to leave.
Yeah.
So you want to go this way and not this way?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What about this one, right?
Yeah. So this one you can do like go back a little bit. So
I want you to move here.
Yeah. If you can, you want to get a little bit here, but you still want to do. You see kind of where it hinges.
Yeah.
So if you line the wax paper right there, that's how you want to.
And then we want to do it on this side.
Yeah, just kind of get it. In there
Which one?
So
there you see trifold.
Yeah. So all of it is. So this is the end paper, and you can like the reason that it's kind of folded like that is because it's down. And so that's what we want to do. Or if we want to attach that part to the shoulder, and then we want to attach. Yeah, and stuff up on the top. Just because it'll make it a better mend. But if you find that it's really deeper, then you don't want to do that because then that gets. I can do that. I did that. Okay. Alexis just shared a great tip for you folks at home. So you might feel like you have to orient the book where it's facing you as if you're going to read it, but you absolutely don't have to do that. You always want to put the wax paper on as much of the text block as you can because it's a more level surface. If you put it on the side with the cover, it's going to move and that makes it a lot harder. And so you can do it where you're holding it with your left hand if you are right-handed and then you're brushing with your right hand. Or if you are left-handed, you can turn it around and hold it with your right hand and then do your brushing with your left hand. So the key is to do whatever is most natural to you. And so you can even try it opposite what you might think would be good, and maybe that would work for you too.
For this book, I can like choose this side, or it just doesn't matter. Should I do both?
So I would do it on the text block, just because it's thicker and just a better. I usually go up just because then that way I don't have to go up on the pages. Yeah. Yeah. So you could do get me started on here. Yeah. Okay. So are you right-handed or left? Right. Right-handed. Okay. Great. So yeah. So this one is actually just a little bit damaged. You can just barely see that it's attached. So we're going to give it a little bit bigger margin just because it's harder to get in there. Yeah. Right? So we're going to put it just about here. Okay. And you're going to charge your brush with glue. And then you're just going to get in there and you're going to brush from the wax paper just right to here. You're going to try not to get any glue on the heart. You want to go this way. I know it's tempting to just go along, but
glue is gonna, if you can see like that. Can you go the other direction, starting in the wax paper? Yeah, there you go. I know it doesn't seem quite natural, but yeah. But that way the wax paper protects. And I think we're gonna watch. You can really charge it up. Yeah. Go back. Yep. There. You do, yeah, you don't need to be. Yeah, I'm not sure about this one. That's right. We can't download any viruses. I think that'll do. I think we need a little bit more here at the top. A little hard to tell. No, I get it. Okay. All right. So now we're going to peel our wax paper off. Yep, and you can see, you see the nice line, but then here we got under a little bit. And that's okay. So then we're going to close it. And we're going to pull this page and line it up as best we can. Just use your hands. And then since our mend is in the back, flip it over and put it over your thread. Okay. Yeah. And then how long does it usually take to dry? So I usually let them dry overnight. Well, let me stand up here.
So once I've done a glue mend, I typically let it dry overnight. It probably doesn't have to be quite that long, but then that way you don't risk opening it and then the glue's not dry and then you have to do the mend over again. And plus when you're at work, it's great because then you mend it, you put it on the shelf, and then the next day when you come in, you can take a look at it. How did everybody do? Good. I guess we'll find out tomorrow when you're all gone. When we did this for our staff training, we had everybody write their name on the little damaged slip so that you could check your own to see, to get that feedback of how you did. But a little different for the workshop today. So was it as scary as you thought, putting glue on a book? No? No? Good. A little bit maybe? So one of the magical things about Elmer's glue is that it is water soluble. So if worse comes to worse, any mend that you do with Elmer's glue is reversible. So if you somehow really totally mess it up, there are ways to go back and to fix it. But of course, ideally, you don't have to do that. It's a much bigger process and probably not worthwhile for the types of things that we're mending. So so just keep that wax paper in place and you have nothing to worry about. All right. Okay, so we're going to do another, we're going to talk about another glued mend. Now, I don't have any today that have this, but I think somebody brought, oh, Laura, you brought one, right? That has a loose page.
I got enough loose pages.
Yeah. Can I snag yours for a second to show them now? Thank you. So this is a mend that often happens. This one is actually in a sewn book. It tends to happen more in glued bindings because the glue just dries out and then pages start to come out. If it's just 1 or 2 pages, it's worthwhile to learn this next technique to tip them in, is what it's called. If it is a paperback book where like huge chunks of the book have come apart, it's going to take a lot more time to, to get that back in working order. It is still possible. So if a book is out of print, for example, but people are still wanting to read it, it might be worthwhile to spend your time on that. But generally, those types of books are pretty easily replaceable. And the glue is just so dried out that it's a bigger process. But if you just have a couple pages, it is not a big deal. And the first thing you want to do is make sure that you're putting them in the right order. So fortunately, these ones are labeled. So we know that it's 8, 9, 10, and then 11. And so for something like this, you would do a mend very similar to what we just did. So I'm turning mine upside down because I want the text block on my left-hand side because that is the flat surface that we want to work on. And so you would do the same thing that we just did to reattach the covers. So you would put your waxed paper about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch from the spine, and you would use your glue brush and you would glue from the wax paper just right up to the crease there. And you would do that all the way up, make sure you've got enough glue everywhere, peel your wax paper off, and then lining up your page with the foredge of your book, because we don't want it to stick out when we're done, right? Then you will smooth it, and you can just use your finger to push it in and get that in place. And now in this case, we've got 2 consecutive pages. So you would do the same thing again before you attach the next page. And then lastly, you would do it a 3rd time to then reattach it to the rest of the book. And you would close it up very carefully like we had done before. You can use the weight of your hand to kind of smooth it to make sure that everything has pushed down. And then because this mend is in the front of the book, you would turn it over so the weight of the book helps hold it in place. When you have a bunch of books, you can stack them on top of each other. And so then the weight of all of the books helps hold it. If you're working in like a conservation lab with fancier books, there's a book press that you put them in to really make sure that everything is where it needs to be. But we don't need that for the kind of work that we're doing. Any questions about that?
If you're doing consecutive pages kind of like that, would you want them to dry between?
Ooh, that's a great question. So the question was, do we want them to dry in between? Because we've got 2 pages, do we do one and let it dry and then do the other? I don't usually. I do them back to back. And part of that is because it's easier. And the other part is that there's no real need to have it dry in between because it's all in the same structure. And so this way, when the glue dries, it helps kind of pull everything together instead of doing one mend and then having to like essentially add another mend on top of it, if that makes sense. But that's a great question. Any other questions about?
Do you need to put wax paper on top of that before you close the book to keep the glue from attaching it to the other page? Or
oh, great question. So you would, yeah, so you would only add wax paper inside to close it up if your glue got beyond where you wanted it to. Generally, you wouldn't need to put wax paper inside for either of these mends that we've done. That's only if you're worried that you maybe put too much glue and it might kind of squirt out when you close it. And then you would put some in. But other than that, no need to include that. I will say Dogman is a tricky one because the pages are like shiny because they're comic book pages. And so they don't soak up the glue as well as like a paperback book does or a more traditionally printed book. That doesn't mean that you can't do the mends and it doesn't mean that they won't work, but they just won't be quite as strong because the paper has a finish on it that keeps the glue from completely absorbing. So another option for damage like this, and then also Yeah, if there is a torn page, thank you for bringing this book, Laura. It's a perfect example. If there's, that's right. That if there's a torn page where it's detached, but it's like a really messy rip, and you could glue it, but it would be a little, and it wouldn't be super strong. There's another tool that I like to use. It is called Filmoplast. So this is paper tape. Again, I like it because it is water soluble. So if something goes horribly wrong, you can get it off of the book pages. I am coming at mending from a conservation background, and so sometimes I might be a little more precious about reversibility. But also the nice thing about it is that if the tape goes down on the page, you can peel it back up. Where if you're using like packing tape or book tape, you know, as soon as it hits the page, it is there forever and there's nothing you can do about it. So this is nice for that as well. And all this is just this thin, slightly transparent, a little bit opaque tape. And I love this for paper rips. Again, on pages like this, it's a little bit more visible than it would be on traditionally printed paper, but I'll pass this around for folks that are here so you can kind of get a feel for what it looks like. Feel free to like rip a small piece off and kind of like play around with it. And so that is also a good option for shinier pages. So like picture books or comic books. If you do the tip in and it just doesn't quite hold, you can also use the Filmoplast as sort of a makeshift internal hinge to hold the paper together. Because it does add some thickness, you really wouldn't want to do more than like 2 pages in a row. Otherwise, it's going to start to mess with the binding. But for something like this, that would be another great option for mending. Thank you, Laura, for this perfect, perfect example. And when you have a page that's ripped, like the one that we were just looking at, you might be tempted to just tape one side of it, thinking like, oh, I don't want to interfere with the pictures too much or something. But with a rip, you really want to tape both sides and secure both sides of that tear. Otherwise, it can tear, it can continue to tear and kind of get caught underneath on the side that isn't protected with the tape. All right. Does anybody have any loose pages in books today that they want to practice this technique with mending? Nope. Okay.
So I have this piece, but it's more ripped out than
yeah.
out. So that's, I see that's a different activity.
So I would do the Filmoplast tape on that because it's got a little bit that's still like in the binding there. Here, I'll pull it up and I'll. Yeah. So this is another ripped page, but you can see it is completely detached. But there is still some of the page that is sewn into the book or glued in this case. And so this is a perfect opportunity to use that Filmoplast tape. And so what you would do is you would line the page up as well as you can, again, keeping an eye on the foredge to keep that square and protected. Whoop. And then I would just take one whole piece of Filmoplast tape and run it all the way up. And then once you've got it on this side, then you can flip it over. And since it'll be partially attached, it'll be easier to tape on the other side. And that would be the best way to handle this one. So feel free to grab some of that Filmoplast and try.
Where did you get Filmoplast?
We just got that from Demco. You can also get it from Talus, which is one of the resources listed in the back of the booklet. And if you just Google Filmoplast tape, other things come up. There are different thicknesses of Filmoplast I learned recently. And I don't know the exact specifications of this one, but there are some thicker ones that don't work as well for like repairing ripped pages because then it obscures like the text or the picture that's underneath a little bit more than this one does. Yeah.
Another thing you can do with film plastic, use it on hinges in pop-up books.
Oh, absolutely. That is a great tip, Laura.
I oftentimes will do it before I go put the book out on the shelf.
Yeah.
Reinforce it.
Absolutely. Yes. Super smart. Yeah. So pop-up books are another great example of a book with lots of hinges that wear out very quickly. And so, yeah, so for the folks at home, Laura just said that she uses the Filmoplast tape to reinforce the pop-up book hinges on the pop-ups, or even with like the, what are they called? The lift the flap books. And so you can reinforce it before there's a problem, or you can also use it once wear has started to show to reinforce it and keep it going a little bit longer. But yeah, that's a great tip. Thank you. I realized at the beginning I neglected to show you some of the other tools that I'll often use. So Filmoplast was one of those. Do you want to try, Sarah?
Sure.
So Filmoplast was one of those additional tools. I'll also use a bone folder. So they used to be made, they were traditionally made from animal bone. Most of them now are plastic. This one is plastic. I'll pass this around so you can kind of get a feel for it. They also make bone folders out of Teflon, which are like a little bit nicer. Not really necessary, but that they feel nice in your hand. And they also work nicer with glue. If you get any glue on it, it peels off a lot more easily than on a plastic one. I also will use, here we go, a micro spatula. And so it has two different ends. You can see this one is like a little more narrow. This one is a little more broad. And this one is metal. I think it's actually coated in some Teflon. You can see it's starting to wear off. And this is great for when you have to get into kind of tiny spaces for mending, or something isn't quite where you want it. As you're closing the book, you can use the micro spatula to kind of put it back in place as you're closing it. It's also great for peeling things up sometimes. I will also use it to take staples out of things, either on bulletin boards or in books. So it's just kind of like a handy tool to have. And then last but not least, this is a Japanese paper spatula. And so you can see it's got a blade here on either side. And I use this mostly for taking stickers off of things. And it just makes that process a lot smoother than picking it off with your fingernails. All of these tools are around $10 or less. If you get some fancier versions, like if you do a Teflon bone folder, those are more like $20, $25. But they're all pretty affordable if this is something that you want to kind of build up your tools to do these mends. A bone folder, lots of people, especially in libraries, probably use the bone folder to help smooth your adhesive plastic protection on your paperback books. It can also be helpful when you're doing some of the glued mends that we just did. If you want to, in the shoulder of your book, kind of hard to see with a dust jacket, but you know, on a book, how it is a little bit, there's a little indent around the spine. And so like Sarah, the mend that you did, right, where you were like, why is it all folded? Yeah, and it was because the book had pulled away from the shoulder. And so if you want to make sure that all the glue gets in there, you can use your bone folder to kind of push especially in the shoulder to make sure everything is connected. There are also special boards you can get. They're called nipping, like a nipping press, where it's 2 boards that have a little piece of metal that hangs over top that is specially designed to create that strong shoulder. People have also made them with like wooden skewers, where they set the wooden skewers and then they put the boards and just use like C-clamps to hold it all together. There's lots of like DIY stuff that you can do with book mending and bookmaking. And so you can kind of get like as finicky with it as you want, but you can also, like I said, a lot of times I'll just use my hand to push it in place and kind of make sure that everything is connected where I want it to be. All right, did I show you all my special tools? I think I did. All right, so this is the part where we are going to use the needle and thread and all that are in your kits. So this is a mend that you can do on a stapled picture back book, or excuse me, stapled picture book where the middle page has pulled out, right? I mean, how many times have you seen that's where it gets the wear? That is, the page gets turned too quickly, and since it's in the center where the staples are, it just comes right out. And so there are a couple ways that you can mend this book, this kind of book. The first way is if you have a saddle stapler, so that's the one with the really deep throat, or a swing arm swivel stapler, you can use those to just re-staple the book in a spot that has not been weakened. So you would see where the current staples are in your spine, and you would just staple in between them, probably in the middle. If there's space, you could do it near the head and tail as well, but you don't want to get too close to the end because you are punching holes, and so you don't want it to rip out the top or the bottom. So that's one option. But a lot of people don't have saddle staplers or swing arm staplers. And so another option is that you can use what's called a pamphlet stitch to actually sew the book back together. And so I'm going to show you how to do that today. And then you're going to practice on your instruction booklet because it can also be sewn with a pamphlet stitch, but right now it's stapled. So I'm going to pull out my needle, and so here's my little, I've got a bunch of different needles in here for different book binding things, but all we need for this one is just a straight needle. And then you all have pre-waxed thread in your kits, and that thread is actually used for basket weaving in addition to book binding. I have in my little fix-it kit some unwaxed thread. It's the same as what you have, except it doesn't have wax on it. And so I'm going to wax it before I sew. All that does is it just helps the thread kind of stick to itself when you're tying the knots and when you're getting the binding tight, so that it doesn't loosen up and make the book all wonky. So to measure your thread, you need to know, you want to make sure that you have enough to bind whatever book you're working on. And so I always do 3 times the height of the book. So 1, 2, 3. And I don't think I have any scissors up here. Where did the paper knife end up? Here we go. Yeah, so it seems like it's going to be too much, but you're going to be glad to have it when you're tying your knot at the end. You could maybe get away with 2.5 times, but I would always rather be safe than sorry, because if it's too short, you have to start all over. And then I've just got a stick of beeswax here. This was actually left over from another program that we did. And so I'm going to wax my thread. Again, you don't need to do this because your thread is already waxed, but I'm just going to press it into the block of wax and run it through a couple of times. This also helps the thread not get tangled, which is a nice feature. And yeah, okay. So I've got my wax thread, and now I've got wax crumbles on my book. All right, so we're going to thread our needle. And so you've got a large eye on your needle that hopefully is big enough to get your thread through. If it feels a little tight, you can use your thumb. Because your thread is waxed, you can use your thumb to kind of flatten it out to get it through. And then once you've gotten it through, it shouldn't be a problem. And so you'll just pull it through. So it's going to be different than like hand sewing where you don't want to double up on the thread. You just want it to be a single thread. And then we're going to lock the needle on the thread. And I don't think I put this in the book. So this is a little extra trick. And so to lock the needle on the thread, you'll do this so that when you are sewing and you're pulling your thread, you don't actually accidentally pull your needle totally off of your thread. Oh, and Alexis has scissors. Thank you, Alexis. I forgot about this part. So yeah, so if folks want to follow along, you're welcome to do that. If you want to watch me do it and then do your own, I'm happy to walk around and offer guidance. Well, it is thread. So once you've got your needle on there, let me know, and then we'll all lock it on together. And if you need help, it's okay to ask for help. Okay.
Sorry.
Wait till you turn 40
I was going to say, come on, Sarah. Are you good for it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so no big deal. So you can actually use, I think it's quilting thread or upholstery thread. If you can't get the basket weaving thread, it's a little bit thicker and more waxy. So it's not ideal, but you can kind of scrape some of the wax off so that it's not quite so heavy in wax. But I've given you basket weaving thread and bookbinding thread, so you're good to go for a little bit. So we're gonna lock the needle on the thread. And to do that, you're gonna twist your thread so that you can see the different pieces kind of separate. I don't know if folks at home can see this or if anyone can see this on the camera. It's a little bit hard to see. But you're kind of twisting it so that it starts to come apart, if that makes sense. And then you're just gonna stick your needle, in between the threads, because you don't want to pierce the thread. You just want to go in between. Oops, that's a little too close to the edge.
And I'm doing this on the little tail.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, you're doing it on the little tail, and you want your needle to go in with maybe, I don't know, an inch or an inch and a half left on the tail. So you don't want it to go too close to the end, because then it could still pull through. And then you're just going to pull it down. So it looks like this. And again, if you need help, that's what we are all here for. And if you pierce the thread, it is not the end of the world, but this is just.
It has 3 pieces to it. So if I just get between somehow, we're good.
Yep, exactly. Yep, okay, and so then you're gonna pull it so that you got your needle locked on there.
Why are we doing this?
So we're doing this part so that as we're sewing the book, we don't pull the needle off the thread and then have to rethread it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Okay, sorry. So once we've gotten the needle through the
Yeah,
pieces, what
here.
next?
Yep, so I'm gonna back up on mine so I can show you the motion. Okay, so you've gotten your needle through your thread. And then all you're gonna do is you're gonna hold the long tail, and then with your other hand, you're gonna hold the needle and you're just gonna pull it.
So that makes the eye.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad you asked, Sarah. You weren't the only one. I know, I realized I kind of just was like, and then it's there. It's perfect. So that's another reason. That's another reason why we do 3 times as opposed to exactly the amount that we need, because we want to have some extra space to lock the needle. We want to have some extra thread for our fingers to hold on to as we're tying the knots at the end. All right, everybody got their needle and thread ready to go? Okay. So I'm going to show you on this book, just because it's bigger and I think it'll be easier to see. So this one still has staples in it, and these staples are a little rusty, so I'm going to pull them out. This is a great time for my micro scalpel or my micro spatula, excuse me, to shine. So I just have slid it underneath the sides of the staple, and I'm going to move that to the side so I can get to all the staples. You can also, if you have a staple remover, not the one with like the teeth, you know, but the other ones that slide underneath, you could probably use that with it. This is a little bit more intentional. You can see a little bit more what you're doing, which is nice. So I'm pulling out the staples, and I don't know if you can see, but they are a little rusted. So it's a good thing we're taking them out, because we don't want that to keep damaging the book. Okay, but now that I pulled the staples out, now there's nothing holding my book together. So you want to be mindful of that and make sure that your pages don't get mixed up. And don't forget to put back in your middle page. So for this one, there wasn't any real damage. It was just pulled out in between where the staples were. But sometimes there will be a rip that is like all the way from one staple to another staple. If the damage is pretty extensive, then you would want to take like the Filmoplast or something to reinforce the paper first before you sew it. But we're not going to do that with this one. And so we can either, what we're going to do is we need 3 holes to sew our book back together. And so we can either use the existing staple holes, since these ones are pretty undamaged, or we can punch new ones. And I'm going to punch new ones so that you can see what that looks like. Now, it can seem kind of intimidating to do this, but I have faith that all of you are capable. And so all you're going to do is you're going to make sure that your book is all lined up. So lined up at the head and the tail. And then you're going to take your awl, and in the crease of the book, you're just going to very gently push it through. So you can see I've made a new hole right along the spine of the book. Now you want to do your very best to get the hole right back on the folded crease spine of the book. If you get it a little bit in the front or a little bit in back, it's going to put some extra stress on the binding. And then that's where you're going to get a tear in your book. So I've got my hole in the head of the book. I'm going to poke another one near the tail. And again, just like with the staples, we don't want to go too far. We don't want to go too far down because then that weakens the tail. So I'm just going to go kind of in between the edge of the book and that last staple. And we'll just push that through. And then I am going to reuse one of the middle holes just because it's in a nice spot and it isn't compromised. But I'm going to push my awl through just to make sure that everything is still lined up the way that it was when it was stapled. So you've got your 3 holes. And so we've got at the head, in the middle, and at the tail. And I'm going to just leave my awl in there to kind of hold everything in place, since remember, I've taken the binding apart, so nothing is holding it together. While I pick up my needle and thread and start my stitch. So we've got a little diagram here in your booklet that's going to help you. So you can see, so the dotted lines are inside of the book. And so we're gonna start on the inside of the book, go through the middle hole to the outside, go down to the hole in the tail, go all the way up on the inside to the hole at the head, and then back through the middle. You got it? Okay, I'm gonna show you. So I'm gonna pull out my awl that's holding my pages together. And I'm gonna go in through the center. And I'm gonna leave, probably about this much, maybe half a page, half the width of the page of a tail, because we wanna be able to tie a knot at the end. And I'm gonna go down to the tail and pull it through. And you may have to finagle it a little bit, depending. Yep. So you start on the inside, you go down the outside. Then we're gonna go, oops, making sure I'm on camera here. Then we're gonna go all the way up to the top. And as you sew, your pages are gonna shift a little bit. And so you can just kind of gently wiggle it around until you find those holes that you originally punched. The less pages you have, the easier that is to do. So then we're back on the outside and we're gonna go through that middle hole. Now, when you go through the middle, you wanna make sure that you are not splitting any of the thread that's there, because we're going to need to move things around. And if you split the thread, then you have kind of pinned it in one place, and that's not what we want. And again, sometimes you got to kind of wiggle it a little bit until you find your spot. So when you pull it through, you want each of your pieces of thread on either side of that big middle stitch, and you want the big stitch on top. Does that make sense? So that's how you want it to end up.
How hot do you want it?
Yeah, so we're going to do that next part. We're going to do that part next. Is everybody all the way through back to your middle? Okay, excellent. So you can see, so I've got a much longer tail on this side than I left on the front, and that's okay because I still have enough here that I can hold on to it. So this is the part that takes a little bit of finesse, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be doing it. And so what we want to do here is we want to pull the thread tight, but we don't want to rip the paper. and so with you all doing it with your instruction booklets, you don't have a thick cover on the front to protect it. So you're going to want to be a little bit more gentle than you might be with a book like this that has that thicker kind of cardstocky cover. But regardless of your paper, you're going to want to hold your thread in each hand, and you're just going to want to pull gently. So you can see my book is moving a little bit as I'm pulling. But if you pull too hard, it's going to be like if you've ever cut cheese with a thread, and it's just going to rip your whole spine out of your book. So no pressure. But if you don't pull it tight, if you're afraid to pull it tight and you're like, I don't want to even deal with it, I'll just tie it how it is, then it's going to be really loose and it's not going to hold your pages in place. So you just want to kind of pull a little bit until you feel that little resistance.
I'm pulling out.
Yes. Yep, you're pulling out. Because that's the other thing too that's going to help you from ripping your spine out, is if you pull it along the spine, then that makes this tension greater and it makes it easier to pull it too tight. So you're just going to pull it until you can kind of feel that this middle is tighter, right? You can see that it's not, right? Like loose like that is not going to hold the book together. And so you'll pull it just until you see it pop up. And the wax on your thread then, when you let go, helps hold everything where you've tightened it. So once you've got it tight, then we're going to tie a double knot, just like with your shoelaces. And we're going to tie it over top of that middle thread. So do you see now I've pinned it in the center? And we're going to do one knot and then a second knot to hold it in place. And then this is where you would trim it up. Actually, I've got scissors. So you don't want to trim it too short because just like in sewing, then it can just pull through the knot. And so I usually leave, I don't know, about that long of a tail. What is that, about 1/2 inch maybe? If you've got a thicker book, I would maybe leave a little bit longer tail, but most of these structures are not more than like, 16, 32 pages. And then you can kind of just move your thread so that it kind of blends in on that middle line. And then you close your book up and you can see your 2 big stitches on the outside. Because it's got a knot in the middle, there's a little bit of a bump. If you have a bone folder, you can use that to kind of rub it in and make space with the paper for that knot. You can also just use your fingers and kind of smush it. And then look, we've got our book all held together. It's not going to fall apart. How'd everybody do?
Sorry, tell me again how long you want the little tail to be?
Yep, so I left mine about maybe 1/2 inch. Yeah. And again, you might be tempted to think, well, that's all I need. I want to like make the best use of my thread and I don't want to have any cutoffs. But think about trying to tie this knot and get everything all taut with just these tiny little pieces. It's just not going to work very well. So, yeah. And then the fun part about this mend is that you can also use this technique to make a book. So if you wanted to do an activity or you want to make your own little instruction manual about something, you can use this same stitching. It doesn't have to be just a repair technique. It can also be a simple binding technique too. Also, I just realized all of our brushes still have glue on them. So we're going to want to clean those. And I'm going to show on the camera how to do it. And then everyone who's here, we're going to go into the kitchen and get them all clean so we can get the glue out. So the first thing you want to do with your glue brush is if you still have a lot of glue in it, we would get a paper towel and you would wipe it off. The reason that we do that is that we don't want glue in our plumbing because it's going to clog your pipes. So you want to get as much of the glue off before you put it under the water as you can. Then we're going to take some dish soap and just squirt a little bit into the palm of our hand. And just like we did with our glue brush when we were charging it with glue, we're going to charge it with soap. And we're going to fill it up with soap and get soap in all of the little nooks and crannies. And then we're going to rinse it and squeeze it out. And then we're going to let it dry sort of at an angle so that the water runs out and off. If you store it upright, then the water and the soap goes into the metal piece and stays there and then weakens the glue in the brush that's holding it together. And if you store it like this, then when the water pools, the bristles still soak it up and it just doesn't dry. And then you have similar problems where the water works its way up the bristles and then still gets into the brush itself. Any questions about that? Okay, and you'll do the same thing with whatever your glue surface is. You'll wipe it out with a paper towel first, and then whatever's left, you can scrub it out with the soap, or if you want, you can wait until it dries and then you can peel it up. So it's however you want to handle it with your stuff at home. But everyone here, we're going to go into the kitchen and we're going to clean our brushes right now, and hopefully they're not too dry. Towels to get everyone yep, we're done. Actually, Sarah, you'll wipe them off and then just you can put them or rinse them off and then put them in the dish dryer that's in there.
here. The grip into the sink. Everyone's brush is still okay. None of them are totally dry. Okay. If they have gotten dry, if you are in the middle of something and you forget, like we did tonight, and it has started to get hard, you can get it wet first, and that'll loosen that glue because it's water soluble, and then you can do the. When you're ready.
So for the folks at home, I just mentioned that if you do forget about your brush and the glue has dried on it because you got distracted or interrupted and then you forgot about it, kind of like we did tonight. If your brush, if it's dried, because this glue is water soluble, you can run your brush under the water first to loosen up the glue, and then you would do the soap and the cleaning it just like you would if it hadn't dried on there. Obviously best if it doesn't dry, but happens to all of us at one point or another. I realize we're going over time. I don't know how much we had. Okay, we're almost done. Okay. Okay. What's that? Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea, March. Yeah, if anyone still waiting in line, we do have the bathroom sinks as well. If you want to go, there are 2 sinks in each of the bathrooms. If you would prefer not to wait, you're welcome to, but you're also welcome to hang out in the kitchen. Yeah. How does that? It's amazing. I've never used it before. That is like magical. Yeah, I'm guessing that's pricey. I mean, you wouldn't want to do it on like every page of every book in your library, but I use it pretty liberally, and this is probably only the second actually gone through here at the library. Okay, all right. Yeah. Mine carbon paper is actually just backing off. Oh, yeah, that is a yeah. So your box has got cover on it. Mine doesn't. Oh, mine came from Denver. It's just a, oh, and it doesn't cut, so I can't take a very lightly score. And I'm sure so that I can never remember which side which side is the back thing. Yeah, because this one was also from Denver. I peeled the label out because it was right over the middle. Yeah. But I know we got this one from Denver too, so maybe it just got like a weird. Yeah. But yeah, definitely it's so much easier when you use the dispenser and it comes right off than when you have like pieces on.
I didn't do that very well because I didn't do it like that.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I thought I had to do it by hand. I'm saving this piece to show my librarian. Like how to do that. But
yeah, and then any that you have that is hanging off at all, you can just use the
yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, pretty great. And like it really blends into exactly. Yeah, right there, but like here you can't do it all. Yeah. Yeah, and if you have like a paperback book like these, like it really so it's pretty magical. Thank you.
Okay, I've got one final piece of magic to show you, and then we will wrap up for the night. We have everybody back. Oh no, we're still waiting for this. Okay, all right, we are almost done. The last thing I'm going to show you is removing adhesive from the cover of a book. So this is really handy when you have gotten books secondhand, Or you want to remove library markings because you're going to replace them with something else. And so you have tried to peel off the sticker and it has just like shredded. Or you have been able to pull off the sticker, but then there's still like stickum left behind. And so there are kind of two different ways that you can deal with this. And there's some stickers that are easier to remove than others. I'm sure folks in the area are familiar with the Stuff, etc. stickers on books that are terrible and awful and basically not worth your time to try to take off because it's just going to rip the cover of your book. But and then on the other side, the Prairie Light stickers that will be on the book for 20 years and then still peel off beautifully without any residue. Are you seeing some that are totally stuck on there?
The poetry library, I don't have to take them off. I want to, and it's a 20-minute battle.
Oh my gosh. Okay, interesting, because we've gotten donations for my nonprofit, and I'm always amazed at how easily they peel off. So maybe those were like stuck in a hot car for a while or something, and it like really like activated that adhesive. But I'm going to show you a trick that's going to make taking them off a lot easier. So, so you've got your sticker kind of partially removed, and so you're going to take your handy eraser. So again, you can use this to remove marks on books, so like pencil marks. Sometimes, depending on the finish of the book, you can also take off like crayon marks or markers, depending on the finish. But you can also use the eraser to take off adhesive. And this is one of my favorite things. So in the little booklet, I explain the best technique, which is to go in circles. So here we go, let me see. So you can see here, I don't know if you can actually, but there is, most of the paper is gone, but it's still sticky. So I'm just gonna take my eraser and just go in circles. And what this does is the eraser adheres to the adhesive, and then with the eraser dust, it pulls the adhesive off. And it is really very cool. Let me see if I can get kind of a close-up. It's very hard to see. It's more, as we all know with adhesive, a lot of it is by feel, that you can feel that it's still sticky. And so I'm just going to pass this around. And if you have a book that you want to try it on, go right ahead. I'll pass this one around and you can kind of try it on the edge. You can use it on the paper part of the adhesive too, if it's really being sticky. But that just takes a lot longer because it needs to pull up the paper and then pull up the adhesive. So this technique is really best when there is adhesive left and most of the paper from the sticker is gone. Oh no, go ahead.
Does this work to remove Scotch tape?
That's a great question. If it is on the outside of the book and you have gotten the plastic of the Scotch tape off, but it's still sticky underneath, it would work for that. So I'll pass this around to the folks that are here. So feel free to kind of like pull the sticker off a little bit with your fingers. This is another great, I'll pass well, I'm not going to pass the knife around. This is my partner's book and they're going to be upset if we damage it. But you can see with the paper knife, because it's got that beveled edge, you can really get underneath the sticker in a way that you just can't with your fingernails. And it also does a better job at keeping the adhesive with the sticker when possible, because it's got that great edge to it. It kind of, it can really get in between the sticker and the cover a lot more easily. So I'm going to pass this around for folks to practice the eraser technique on. And just make sure you don't put it in your on your glued waxed paper. Now another option, especially for those really really sticky stickers is Goo Gone. And I know some librarians really hate Goo Gone because it can stain your books because it is oil-based. So if you have a cover that has been partially damaged and underneath the paper underneath the cover is now exposed, you know, it doesn't have that protective coating on it anymore, Goo Gone will stain around there. But if your cover is intact or you care more about getting the sticker off more than you care about a little discoloration, Goo Gone is a really great option. You can use it with cotton balls or just paper towels. And the key with Goo Gone is you soak your paper towel or cotton ball in the Goo Gone, and then you rub it completely over the sticker that you want to remove, and then you wait. And that's the hardest part for me, is the waiting. And so I'll often do it and then walk away and do something else, because if you wait, I think it recommends like waiting up to 5 minutes. And so if you wait, then when you come back, you can just, most of the time, there's always exceptions, but often you can just peel it right up. And then even if there's some adhesive left, you can scrub it with your Goo Gone paper towel, or you can let it dry, or you can, you know, wipe it off and let it dry. And then you could use your eraser to get up the rest of the adhesive if you'd like. But I use Goo Gone pretty frequently when we have replacement books that come into the library that have, you know, all kinds of different stickers all over them. Either they've been taken out, weeded from another library, so they've got that library's markings all over them, or it's from a used bookstore and they have all their barcodes and everything everywhere. And I think it is a really helpful tool, as long as you know when it makes sense to use it and when it doesn't make sense to use it. Any questions about that? Okay, great. So in the back of your booklet, I want to make one important correction. So I've listed some of these resources for you. So Dick Blick, which is a local art supply store, they do have a small book binding section where you can find some of these tools that we've talked about tonight. There's also Talus, which is based in Brooklyn, New York, and they have updated their website since I made this booklet. So their website is actually talusonline.com, not just talus.com. If you Google Talus, it'll probably also bring this up, but I wanted to make sure you had the correct URL. Talus is where I got most of my tools. So like the Japanese paper, oops, let me do this, Japanese paper spatula, the micro spatula, and not this bone folder. This one is here at the library, but I have a couple of Teflon ones at home that I also got from Talus. And those are pretty great. You can also get the, the Filmoplast tape that we looked at tonight. You can get that from Talus. If you're not associated with a library and you don't have a Demco account, to order it from Demco. And then last but not least, the waxed thread that we used tonight that's in the kit is from royalwoodlimited.com. And they are an Ohio-based basket supply company, and they have tons of different colors of wax thread, which is really fun, and it's a really great thickness and amount of wax for the type of mending that we did tonight. I also have a bunch of wax thread from when I was studying bookbinding at the university. So if this is something that you're interested in and you would like more of the wax thread, let me know, because I probably have some I can just give you, because they do come in these really huge spools that one person is probably not going to use in a reasonable amount of time with this kind of stuff.
What thickness was the thread we used?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't think I have my label on mine anymore. I can look it up and we can email it out to everybody, because they do have a couple different ones. And I can't remember if they have it as like 3-ply, because that's what this is, or if there are some variations in the 3-ply type. But I'll look at my labels at home and then we'll send out an email to let everybody know what to look for. That's a great question, Kristen. And then at the bottom here, I have some other online resources for book mending. So you can see here, this book Zoompa WordPress blog has some fun different options for book making and book mending. And then I put together this tiny URL. This is an ALA, American Library Association guide to do some simple book mending that is geared specifically towards libraries, but is helpful for anybody. And then of course you have your booklet that you can refer to with all of your great notes. And I will say, we've got it here on the back, that by participating in this workshop, you help support the Solon Public Library by attending our program. And then you also help support Antelope Lending Library, which is an independent bookmobile that operates in Johnson County and Muscatine County. These kits are something that we sell as a fundraiser to help support the work that we do. And so you unwittingly participated in helping support that as well. And I will throw in one final little note. So Sarah, you were mentioning like who has the time to mend all of these books? We're all busy, especially if you work in a small library. And so we started tracking our book mending here at the library. And I'm going to kind of zoom into this for the folks at home. So we just tracked from the beginning of this fiscal year, so July 2021 to March 2022. And I just myself mended 183 books and saved the library $3,426.92. And so we measured that by what the listed cost in our catalog was of the item if we needed to replace it. And so that alone, I mean, is worth so much, especially when you have a small or non-existent book budget. And so to be able to show, your stakeholders, look at this new skill that I learned. Now I can, these books will last longer and I'm saving you all of this money. So you should give us a little bit more money so that we can buy new things because they'll last longer because we know how to fix them. So we'll just end with that. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. And I've got some more stuff up here if you want to look at things or talk more about book mending. I'm happy to hang out. And make sure you take all your things home. I don't know what we want to do with the wet brushes for people to take home. Maybe just don't put them in your bag. Put everything else in your bag, but not your wet brushes. But don't forget about them in the kit then.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Okay. Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's question. Sure. Is the Mac-Weaving company associated with Longer? I know they have like a warehouse or something. I'm from Hawaii. I actually don't mind. They have a giant roadside traction that's just like a gigantic it's a thing. So maybe I don't know. It's just weird.